Hey, welcome to Levers of Economics, where we cover the levers that move the world. Today we need to have a serious talk about the lack of privacy in the United States. I started looking into this because I went to Walmart at the beginning of this year for the first time in years. I haven't been to Walmart, I just haven't lived near one, didn't need to go to get my groceries. So I went to Walmart, picked up a few things, paid with my credit card, left, didn't think anything else about it. Then, a few months later, I went to go buy the Switch 2, and Walmart was one of the only places that had them. So I went, made an account there, paid for it, got it shipped to my house. When I looked at my purchase history on the website, I saw this purchase that I had made months ago that I didn't even remember making. And it was just connected with the account that I had made later on and associated, and they recorded everything and remembered it. In some ways, this is something we kind of expect to happen at the big box retailer stores, especially because a lot of people used to get the loyalty cards, which came along with an agreement that they would track everything you bought, basically, and they would be able to sell that data. That's not really what's happening anymore, because they're just tracking whatever you buy with a card attached to your name, whether or not you make an agreement with them or not. Let's go through exactly what they're tracking and why that ends up being a problem. All right, I'm sure everybody's seen one of these before. This is a Square terminal. You probably paid for your meal at a restaurant using this thing. They're all over the place now. To figure out how big of a problem this is, about how many stores you walk into will have this kind of thing across the country is a bit trickier of a problem. So to figure that out, we'll have to go to Square's actual official numbers. Now, we're going to go straight to Square's parent company, Block Inc. They have a meeting every year where they go through a bunch of stats, and we're going to be pulling directly from that, getting the numbers straight from the source. So here we have just a breakdown of what their customers are, and they state here that 4 million sellers use Square. And if we look at the breakdown of revenue by the size of the company that uses their terminals, most of them do under $500,000 in transactions annually. And for a rough level thing that we're doing right now, we'll just say that that is approximately what we'll be considering small businesses. Most definitions use the number of employees that work there, but that's not something we can figure out from the data that they have. It's really not anything we could break out. So then we have to figure out, because Block is a global company and they've got customers all over the world, we've got to figure out how many of them actually are inside the United States to be able to figure out how many are relevant for what we're looking at. So they make about 22.3 million in revenue in the US, and that's about 93% of their total. So if we look at a bit of a different source here, the US Small Business Administration, you can see there are 33 million small businesses in the US, but only about 6.1 million of them actually have employees. And when we're talking about businesses that you would go into and they would have a terminal facing you that you would pay at, we're going to assume that they have at least a few employees. All right, if we bring that all together, we've got 22.3 million out of 24.1 million equals 93% of the revenue is made in the United States, and we'll use that as a proxy for how many point-of-sale terminals they have in the United States versus abroad. That's not a perfect assumption. There's going to be some skewing of that due to the amount of larger businesses in the United States that probably they're not going to have one-to-one more point-of-sale terminals. So it's going to skew the numbers a little bit, but by using the next assumption, we're going to try and bring it back down a little bit. So times the 58% we're calling small businesses, times the 4 million sellers, divided by 6.1 million employer firms. We have about 36% of all small businesses in the United States using Square terminals. These numbers could be a little bit off, obviously. The assumptions are listed at the bottom. You can argue about that all you want, but seems to be in the ballpark. You can also just go walk around, see what's around you specifically. You might have disproportionately higher or lower amounts of these terminals in your local area, which would be obviously more relevant to you. So you don't necessarily need to care about this at all. This is just to give you an idea of what the situation is all throughout the country. Now let's look at what exactly the information they're collecting is. So when you swipe or tap your card at a terminal, they get a few pieces of information just from the data that you have on your card. The cardholder name, the number, the transaction date, the transaction amount, and a key thing here is a list of all the items that you bought and how much they cost. Very useful thing for the business to know. Not something you probably want the business keeping track of along with your name forever, but maybe that's just me. So let's talk about what happens when you go back to the same place a second time. You go back and you pay again and they get the same pieces of information. Now, how do they know that it's you? How do they combine these to keep a list over time of all the transactions you've made? Did they do it by looking at the name? No, obviously, because there are multiple people that can have the same name even in the same area. So what they do is they typically go by card number. And as far as I'm aware, they don't split this out. So if you are a married couple with the same accounts, I don't think you would have a different profile unless the business itself chooses to split you out based on name, which is possible on the terminals. I just don't know that it's set up so that the typical business would have that. So once they have that, they merge over your old transaction information and they get rid of the secondary profile, and they've unified it all, and they have this big list, which does mean that if you use different cards, they won't necessarily be able to combine all of your information into one profile. Not to say that they couldn't, because they have the ability to do so. It just requires that the owner of the store or whoever's operating the terminal to do it manually. So right now, what do they actually use? They use the card number, and if you give them to them, your email and your phone number. But what is obviously possible for them to do is they can do it manually. If they see your face and know who you are, they can just connect to your transactions with your past transactions. Somewhat of the scary one in the future is that I expect they could probably, to some degree of confidence, look at what is in your order along with your name, and then say, well, if they ordered this and their name is this, they probably are who we think they are, and combine them that way. So even using separate cards may not permanently prevent you from having your information merged into one large profile. So the scary part, maybe you don't care about your local business having this information. Maybe you expect to be tracked everywhere, but let's look at what could actually be happening with your information. So you've got these profiles at all these local businesses that have all of your transaction information for however long you've gone there, however long they've had the terminal. Where is this information stored? Well, it's not stored on the Square terminal because they don't have enough storage space for that. It is stored on Square servers. Now they say they silo the information so that the information from separate businesses never interacts, and that might be true, but it still, to me, seems to be a bit of a worrying situation. We know that they have the capability to merge profiles, so what they could be doing on the back end is taking all of these profiles they have for different businesses and merging them into one Square profile that has all of the information about all of your purchases for every local business you've been to that uses these terminals under one profile, and they could do whatever they want with it. Sell it to other companies, use it to dynamically change prices like ride-sharing apps do nowadays. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to have anyone be able to do this, whether or not they are actually doing it. The current CEO, Jack Dorsey, probably better known as the co-founder of Twitter, he initially got kicked from his position as CEO in about 2009, where he went to go work full-time on being the CEO of Block until he came back sometime in the 2010s for a little while, until Elon Musk bought the company. So do we think that Square under Jack Dorsey would be combining all these profiles to sell your information? I don't think so. He's had a fairly consistent stance on privacy for over a decade. We can just watch the clip here and you can hear it from his own words.
Anonymity is important to our democracy. We value anonymous communication in the form of whistleblowing, which I think is a really important checkpoint to our government.
Whether you believe him or not is another question, but he seems to have been fairly consistent on this. So I don't think that combining all of your transaction history into one profile to sell off for profit is something that Jack Dorsey would set out to do. My personal opinion, this is a bit of a conspiracy, but less than it was before he started pushing crypto transactions through Square. My opinion is that he's using Square to push for widespread adoption of crypto for daily transactions, which I don't really know much about crypto, so I'm not going to speak on that, but that seems to be his objective over the long term. But we have to remember that Block Inc. is a public company, and this wouldn't be the first time that he could be removed from being CEO because the shareholders wanted him gone, because they want somebody who will do exactly what I'm saying. Here we have an excerpt from a story about the backstory behind Twitter, where they talk about in about 2008 how the board planned to oust Jack as CEO and basically just quietly sweep him away from the company. And this could obviously happen again. There's nothing stopping a board of a public company from just kicking the CEO out and replacing them with somebody who will sell all of your data and allow it to be processed by AI and used in whatever manner they think is fit. So yeah, I think there is a pretty significant problem here where not only are the large companies that you would expect to be tracking all of your information doing so, now, even if you go to a small local business, they're doing the same. Knowingly or not, your information, it's being sent off to Silicon Valley, and you just have to trust that they won't misuse it, which I personally wouldn't. What can you really do to prevent them from getting as much data as they want to have on you? So, as an individual, your options are kind of limited. Right now, all you can really do is buy with different cards at different places, and that probably isn't going to work forever. Eventually, they'll figure out how to correctly associate names with purchases, and they'll probably connect it all eventually anyway. So really all you can do is just pay for things in cash. I know a lot of businesses nowadays are offering discounts, or rather passing along the credit card surcharge to you now anyway. So it might even be cheaper to pay for things in cash. But the main benefit is that every single thing you buy is not going to be recorded by a massive company. If you're a business owner, you could just not get these registers for your business, which I get that they provide you with useful information you can use to run the business, but that, in my opinion, isn't really information that you should have. And what can you do if you're the US government? Surprisingly little, I think. Because what can you actually do to make sure that this information isn't getting connected and passed along across all these businesses? I mean, are you going to audit them? You would need people who know what they're looking for, and the businesses could just hide the information anyway. I think really all you can do is go back to the antitrust legislation and start breaking up these giant companies, which would provide a whole host of other benefits that I'm not going to talk about. But that's all I got. Thanks for listening to me. If you want to see more like this, subscribe down below. Let me know what else you'd like to see. I'm planning on doing a similar video about how cameras are everywhere tracking you now. I've seen a lot of people talk about how the numbers for jobs or inflation or GDP coming out of the government aren't to be trusted anymore, and I haven't really seen any evidence that that's true, and I've seen some evidence against it, so I'll probably do a video on that, at least for jobs. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for watching.